Well, as the storm moved by, the wind direction kept changing, and the house was a concrete block house with a poured concrete tie beam around the top. The roof flew off, and the interior walls got sucked out, and we moved around in the house as the wind direction changed. We kept on the windward wall as the wind clocked around.
That was Flip Pallot telling a story about how he survived Hurricane Andrew in his house while in the eye of the storm. This is episode number 70 of the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
How's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. Today's episode is sponsored by the WFS Member Society. The society provides exclusive discounts and access to innovative products and services from our member partner companies. Head over to wetflyswing.com/members to check out some of the companies who are on board. Plus, you can support the show all at one convenient location. In today's episode, I talk with legendary Flip Pallot, who has been on the leading edge of fly fishing for many years now. We talk about some of the fishing shows he has hosted over the years, including the Walker Cay Chronicles, which lasted longer than Seinfeld. Flip tells us how he came to design one of the best skiffs on the water, gets into some bone fishing tips, and a new brand of rum that he's developing. Don't miss this as Flip tells us a story about Lefty Kreh and how Lefty came to his savior after Hurricane Andrew hit. So, without further ado, here's Flip Pallot. How's it going, Flip?
Perfect. Thanks for asking.
Good. Great to have you on here. I wanted to dig into some of the background. You're on kind of the other end of the country, and I've talked to a number of people out there, but you've obviously been around the fly fishing and just the fishing game for quite a while. I was hoping we can dig into some of the stuff you've done, but maybe you can just start us off and tell us how you got into fly fishing in the first place.
Well, it's, as you suggested, a long story, but I was really, really lucky just by wonderful accident of birth to have been born and able to grow up in South Florida, which was which became the cradle of saltwater fly fishing and saltwater light tackle fishing, for that matter. And so, because I was there, and because I was young, and because I was passionate about it, and I had friends that were equally passionate, and we had tons of leisure time and zero disposable income growing up. So it was always a balancing act to get to the fish and be able to have enough money to date and everything that you do as you're at that point in your life. So, but because I was there and because it was happening, I just sort of got sucked into the vacuum of the whole thing, along with four of my friends, and we literally fly fished day and night. We were fortunate because we had 50 or 60 species of fish that were legitimate fly rod targets, and they were in South Florida readily available to us. We were also 45 minutes away from the Bahamas, so we had that at our disposal as well.
Yeah.
And we were young and bulletproof and tremendous stamina and no brains and no money. A perfect storm.
So what year was that when you first, in that period when you first got into fly fishing?
And that would have been in the early 60s. Well, actually, let's see. Yeah, the early 60s.
Okay.
Probably started fly fishing in 61 or 62.
And were there other people out there other than you guys fly fishing?
There were. It was just becoming popular, and people from the trout world and the salmon world were bringing the concept. They didn't have the tackle; it didn't exist. They didn't have the flies; they didn't exist as well. The biggest, baddest tackle available that we could tilt at saltwater species was the Orvis Batten Kill bamboo fly rod. It was fiberglass and resin impregnated and split bamboo, and would have been equivalent to what we think of as a 9-weight today.
Okay.
And we were actually trying to catch giant tarpon over 100 pounds.
Jeez.
Amberjack and sailfish and wahoo and kingfish. And I mean, we were trying to do everything with the Batten Kill. And it wasn't until quite a while later that fiberglass came along, and that really changed the saltwater game. The introduction of fiberglass into fly rods was, I mean, it was huge. It was a life-changing deal.
What was why was that so big? I mean, just the increased casting efficiency, or why was it such a big change for saltwater specifically?
There were a lot of reasons. Not the first of which was fiberglass was a fraction of the weight of bamboo. Also, the modulus of fiberglass was in the hundreds of thousands. Fiberglass had a tremendous, much higher modulus than bamboo.
And what is that? Can you explain the modulus?
Modulus is weight to stiffness.
Mm-hmm.
And fiberglass had an ability to rebound and return to its original shape when you bent it. Bamboo, after an extended fight with a big fish, took a set, and you had permanent bend in your rod. You could work it out very, very carefully by bending it in the opposite direction, but it only made it bend worse the next time. And that, of course, affected the casting characteristics of the rod. But that's what there was. And because we did not know any better, it was great. Mm-hmm. We loved it. The other thing that changed things tremendously was advances in fly lines. Fly lines in the early 60s had designations as to size, but weight was pretty much not considered. They were tapered with various different tapers, much less sophisticated than the tapers used today, and there were no 6-weight, 7-weight, 8-weight. That didn't exist. There was alpha designations for fly lines, G2AF, GAF, G3AF, and they meant something, but not enough that you could say, okay, I have this rod, which had no designation whatsoever. It was just a rod. And to try to find the line for it was a crap.
Wow. Okay.
And so I guess it was in the later 60s, maybe even the early 70s, Myron Gregory from out in California came up with the weight system for fly lines and corresponding fly rods. And that became a wonderful standard which lasted until, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago when things got out of control again, and as they are right now.
Right.
Yeah, please don't get me started on that.
No, we've talked about that on this show already. I've covered a lot of the spay stuff with steelhead and everything. And yeah, I mean, that's a big, a tough one for people getting into it because there's just so many different lines that people get confused. But no, I've got some other big topics I want to hit on here. But yeah, just following up on that, you basically are out there, one of the first people out there, with the bamboo rods. And so you get the new rod and just makes everything a lot easier. You can land fish quicker, and then what's the next step going from there? So you have new lines, and then, I mean, where did all with your life? I mean, you eventually got into making boats, and I mean, can you talk a little bit about how you went from that period you're talking about in the 70s sometime to having your own TV show, the Walker Cay Chronicles, I guess the Saltwater Angler was maybe before that, but and then you had your boat company. Can you just fill us in how all that came to be?
Yeah, I had 3 or 4 over the course of my television lifetime, but I got started in it. Stu Apte, who's a notorious saltwater fisherman and who was a great teacher to me, in the early years, Stu invited me to do some ABC American Sportsman shows with him, and some outdoor life shows, which were some of the early outdoor programs. So I did those shows with Stu and got a feel for what was involved and so forth, but didn't really strike out on my own until I was contacted by a producer who was interested in doing a saltwater show and had seen me on one of the American Sportsman shows and just thought he would contact me to see if I would be interested in hosting a show, which I did. And that was the Saltwater Angler. Okay. And we did that for a couple of years. And then I did another show with trying to think who sponsored that, but anyway, it was mostly a show, saltwater fishing in the Keys and South Florida, and did that for a couple of years, and then did a show for Ford Motor Company for another couple of years, and I did the Walker show. Actually lasted 16 seasons. Wow. Which was a pretty good run. I mean, it was longer than Seinfeld.
No kidding.
And yeah, and that show really came out of the blue clear sky. My wife, who was a flight attendant for Pan Am, was flying down to South America, and a young man got on the plane in Miami and had a fly rod. And I think he was going to Argentina. They developed a problem with the plane on the flight, and they had to spend a couple of days somewhere along the route. I think maybe in Peru or somewhere. Anyway, they landed somewhere and spent a couple of days. And Diane invited this young man to have supper one night with the crew. And so they were having supper, and Diane says, well, I noticed that you had a fly rod. And he goes, yeah, I'm going down to Patagonia to fly fish. And at that time, I had done some television, but I was guiding full time then, guiding in saltwater, guiding in freshwater, guiding out in the Rockies in the summer, guiding elk hunters. I mean, I was guiding full time, and I was very busy. And so she tells this guy that I'm a fly fishing guide in the Keys, and I don't think he paid much attention. And then a couple of months went by, and he saw me on a show somewhere and contacted me. And it turns out that his family owned the island of Walker Cay.
Wow.
And they actually hired me to come down there and assess the bone fishery to see if they had sufficient bonefish to start a bone fishing operation there on the island. And the family that owned the island, the patriarch of the family, had invented and held all the worldwide patents and licenses for the aerosol spray valve.
Jeez.
So he had a lot of horsepower.
Yeah.
And just to shorten the story, I worked for them for a while on the island, set up a guiding operation on the island. Mm-hmm. And then some friends and I started talking about maybe producing a show that didn't have the celebrity format that the other outdoor programs had, that just had real people from the real activity. And we wound up approaching the owner of Walker Cay to see if he wanted to become the financial partner of a fishing program that would be worldwide in scope, but the lyrical jumping off point for every episode would be the island of Walker Cay. In that way, drawing attention to the island and business to the island, which it really did.
It did.
And we had a very successful partnership, and until his death, and then immediately after his death, 3 hurricanes destroyed the island and all the infrastructure on the island.
Wow, was that Hurricane Andrew?
No, this was way after Andrew. This was probably 2000.
Oh, okay.
2000.
Yeah, Andrew was
3 or 6 or something like that.
Okay.
Andrew was 93.
93, okay.
Or 92 or 93, yeah. So we were in Andrew. We lived in Homestead for Andrew, and my mother and father were born in Homestead, and my grandfather came there in the last of the 1800s, and those people never left for hurricanes. And so that when they came around and told us that we had to evacuate, a mandatory evacuation, we said, yeah, we're getting our things. But we didn't.
No kidding.
We stayed. Yeah.
You were there during the Hurricane Andrew in 92?
Yeah. Our house blew down with us in it in about 45 minutes.
How did you, can you take us to that moment? Like what does that feel like as you're sitting there? Do you know, you probably don't know how big it's going to be, and then your house is torn down. Can you take us to that?
No, we had no idea what was coming. We had absolutely no idea. We lived very near the Homestead Air Force Base, and the anemometer there blew away at 227 miles an hour.
Jeez.
So they don't know how high the winds were in Andrew.
How did you survive?
Well, as the storm moved by, the wind direction kept changing, and the house was a concrete block house with a poured concrete tie beam around the top. The roof blew off, and the interior walls got sucked out, and we moved around in the house as the wind direction changed. We kept on the windward wall as the wind clocked around, and then all at once we got about 25 minutes of the eye of the storm. And then when the other side of the eye wall hit, it hit at full force, whatever full force was. But in the end, we lost 2 automobiles. We lost my boat, my airboat, a lifetime of photography in the Everglades, computers, cameras,
everything,
tackle. We lost everything. The next morning, there was absolutely nothing left but us.
Did people?
This,
I mean, you probably had people around you that were. I mean, people all lost their lives too. And I mean,
well, there was some of that. Many people left.
Okay. How many people do you think? How many people do you think? I mean, held tight like that?
Oh,
quite a few.
Back then, there were plenty of people that still had traditional Florida values and roots, and those are the people that might have stayed. And we had friends who lost their lives staying.
Yeah.
And we after it was over, we couldn't leave. We had to make an insurance claim and then remain at the wreckage of the house, because if you weren't there when the adjuster came, then they just put you at the back of the line and went on to somebody else. So we borrowed a truck that had a little camper shell on the back, and we stayed right there at the house until the insurance company came.
Yeah. And
just an interesting aside. Are you familiar with the name Lefty Kreh?
Oh yeah.
Well, Lefty, an old dear friend, showed up 2 or 3 days after Andrew. It was impossible to get into Homestead. It was a miracle that he was able to get there. And he had a paper sack with $25,000 in it.
No way.
Yeah. And he said, Flip, he goes, you and Diane are going to need this money. He said, Ev and I, this is money we save it in a washing machine, and we, in the basement, and we never use it. We will never need it. He says, if you can pay it back, fine. If not, don't even worry about it. Just take this money and use it to. Yeah.
That's I've heard stories about Lefty, like some amazing stories, but that one just gives you goosebumps, because that's amazing.
It does. I have thousands of Lefty stories. He was my dearest, closest friend for many, many, many years.
Wow.
Probably for many decades. But we were able to get through Andrew and relocate elsewhere in the state. The Homestead area was so drastically changed after that hurricane for many, many reasons. We didn't feel like it was home any longer, and Diane was able to get reassigned to a base in Orlando, and we built a home in the woods over east of Orlando on the coast, and here we've been since Hurricane Andrew.
Oh, no kidding! And you were there during you said the 2006 hurricanes as well.
Yeah, those 4 that hit right here. Yeah,
gotcha.
We were here for that, and those big fires in '98, and
wow,
and we've had our share of fun.
Yeah. Have you ever thought, after some of these big natural disasters, of just getting out, and then getting away from the hurricane area?
Yes. I would, if it was up to me, I would spend the entire hurricane season in the Rockies and shut this place down. Unfortunately, my wife is so fully nested here and involved in animal rehab and rescue and all sorts of things. She's not as willing as I am to take off. But I'm tired of seeing things revolve counterclockwise. I could walk away.
Yeah. Are you seeing, this is kind of on a random, I was just talking about this the other day, but are you seeing changes with the climate change and stuff? Are we seeing more frequent hurricanes and things like that out there?
No. I'm not a big believer in climate change.
Yeah. So you feel that you've been there since. Oh, go. I was going to say you've been there since a long time, and you feel like it's all just we've seen the same things. Just hurricanes come and go.
They come and go. It's I don't think we control that.
Yeah.
And I don't think that this is coming and becoming worse because we deserve it or whatever. I just think it's a weather pattern. My God, we've never been able to predict weather or understand it for that matter. So I don't believe, I didn't believe in global warming, and now that they've changed it to climate change,
exactly.
I don't believe in that.
That's right. That's right. There's the safe words. Yeah, global warming is the word you don't use anymore, but climate change is basically the same thing. But no, that's that story is. I mean, that's unbelievable to hear your perspective. I would really love to hear more about all that. I think I want to tie into a little more back to, maybe we'll take it back to some of the fly fishing shows, because I don't want to miss out on some of these questions I have for you. But when you think about the Walker Cay, which was the 16 years running, which is a huge amount of time, I mean, how would you describe that show to somebody who's never watched it before?
It wouldn't be easy, Dave. It's because to describe that show to people who watch the shows today would be difficult, because it was very different. And it was different because we wanted it to be different, but it was different because there was a different time. It was a different circumstance with sponsors. It was also a time when we shot the episodes on film, and film had a look and a feel, and we recorded the sound through very sophisticated sound recording equipment. So the sound of everything was richer, and the look was richer, and the show was lyrical instead of infomercialistic, because we could get the money from sponsors to do it, and sponsors didn't have the power then to turn a show into an infomercial, because there weren't all these people hitting up the same sponsors for the limited amount of sponsorship dollars that were available. So it was much easier for us to produce I don't want to say a better show, but a different kind of show, a show with more production values, a show that could be more lyrical, a show that had the ability to feature relationships instead of hawking products. And so it would be hard. It would be hard.
What do you mean by relationships?
To describe it. Human relationships. In other words, on Walker's, there was always a guest, always. And the guest was always someone who I had a relationship with. They weren't just random guests.
Gotcha.
There was always an alchemy, always a bond. And that resonated with people, because anglers all have a fishing companion that they fish with. And the relationship between fishing buddies is a relationship that can transcend friendship. It can give rise to exchanges that you might not have with a lawyer or a priest. Those relationships have the tendency to lead to other relationships and so forth. And so we always featured that very, very heavily as anything else on the program. That particular bond. And people recognized it, and for the most part would cleave to that. And I think we wrote the show and narrated it with more emphasis than shows today. And the entire look and feel and sound of the show was different. The music was not something that we bought from somewhere. My brother and my cousin wrote the music, and
That's cool.
So they wrote it for the images. It wasn't something that got as close as it could to. No, it was written for every scene So there were a lot of aspects.
Did you guys fish? So you covered, I mean, you basically covered most of the U.S., right? Did you guys get outside and go, or was it, and you covered trout, you kind of covered all species, or was it a majority of saltwater?
We went absolutely all over the world. We went to some of the most remote places in the entire world.
Oh, wow.
Most of our episodes were not in the States.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've watched a little bit, just building up, but I guess the ones I didn't see, the ones outside. So, okay. And now is this, you can still watch these from, right? Is there a library of all these?
Well, it's a sad story. The episodes are all owned by ESPN, and they reside in a vault somewhere moldering. ESPN is not willing to discuss selling them, leasing them, forming a partnership to re-air them. They're not interested in discussing
why
anything.
Would that be?
Well, I think they have concerns about legalities, and those legalities are at this point steeped in antiquity, and they don't know if they have releases for all the people on the shows.
Gotcha.
They don't know. I mean, they're afraid.
Yeah,
they're afraid, and
that's too bad.
It's all ghosts. So I have digitized all of the shows. Just finished doing that.
Oh, so that's I was watching from your website, I believe.
Well, there a lot of them are on the Hells Bay Boatworks website, but I'm going to put them all on a YouTube channel and let people see them. I'm not going to air them or monetize them in any way. I'm just going to put them out there and people can look at them.
That's great. I think that's awesome.
So that's coming, and it's funny. It did air for 16 seasons, and the last season, I'm trying to think, but I think the last season was 90 or 2003 or 2000, somewhere around in there. So it's been basically 20 years since the last show aired.
Uh-huh.
So there's a generation of fly fishermen who have evolved that never saw the show.
No.
Plus all the people that did see the show, but it had been 16 years since they saw the first show.
Yeah.
So that's 36 years since the first show. So I think
well, and you could look at
to re-air.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you could look at I'm 43, and I hadn't seen any of the shows either. So I'll bet you there's a bunch of people out there that you would love to see them that have no idea.
I think so. And it had been 20 some years since the hurricanes or almost 20 years since the hurricanes that destroyed Walkers. And I had not been back to the island since the hurricanes, since actually before the hurricanes. So I always wanted to go back and film it, but I was reluctant to do that because the island was destroyed. There was nothing there. I thought that it would be sad to revisit the bones of a lion. And so in the summer, this past summer, someone bought Walkers with a plan to revitalize it and bring it back to what it was, only better.
Mm-hmm.
And by better, I don't mean bigger and more elaborate. I just mean what it was done better. And an interesting guy, and he contacted me, and I decided to go over and do a film, but to take my little skiff, a little 17, 18-foot skiff, and run it across the Gulf Stream from Florida to Walker's, and film in all the old places where we filmed the Walker Cay Chronicles, around Walker Cay, for bonefish and snapper and sharks and barracudas and bottomfish grouper and snapper and things. So I got hold of an old dear friend who filmed a lot of the Walker shows over there with me. And we did. We went back to Walker's and we filmed running the little boat across the Gulf Stream and seeing Walker's again for the first time in 20 years. And then we revisited all the old episodes of the Chronicles, and we pulled footage out of he and I decades ago when we were young and pretty. And we refilmed all that same fishing
Wow.
in all those same places, and in the film we cut back and forth.
Oh, cool. Cool.
To the old faded footage, and then back to the new. Anyway, it's turned out to be a really, really interesting film, and I'm in the process of writing it right now, writing the voiceover right now.
Oh, cool. What did that, I mean, how did that feel going back to that old area, being gone so long, and then what was that like?
You're going to have to watch the show.
Oh, yeah. All right. Is it going to be, how are you going to release it, or where's it going to be?
Well, we were going to do a fly fishing film tour version of it, but the rules were too restrictive for what we want to portray and the thing. So we've backed out of that. So I think we're going to do probably an hour-long version, and we'll probably show it on networks as a special. But we're doing shorter versions, social media versions for ourselves and YouTube channel, and for we had some sponsors that helped us, and so we're going to do social media versions of it for them, for their sites.
Yep.
So it'll be pieces of it, and all of it will be all over the place. You'll probably be tired of it. Yeah.
Let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsors. The PDX Auto Mart specializes in trucks and SUVs to meet your expectations and high demands both on and off-road, assuring you are 100% satisfied is their number one priority. If you're in the Portland area, stop on by and meet the guys down at the Auto Mart. And if you're not in the Portland area, they actually can ship the vehicles out to your location around the country. And I made a special connection with the guys recently while looking over a truck purchase. And although I was a bit skeptical at first based on the typical kind of used car salesman stuff, I can tell you these guys are next level service, and they don't let you go home unsatisfied. Even when things pop up, they're definitely there to take care of you, which is very important when buying a used car. So here's to Mehdi, Jeff, Jeremy, and all the bunch down there. Cheers to you guys. Head over to pdxautomart.com. That's pdxautomart.com, and take a look at their selection. Tell them I sent you from the Wet Fly Swing podcast, and they'll make sure to take care of you in an extra special way. Today's show is also brought to you by the Wet Fly Swing Member Society. By joining the group, you get access to over 30 fly fishing and tying companies, along with exclusive discounts and services on products and services, which is a really cool deal. Lots of great companies doing good stuff. And we're always adding new companies and products to the mix. So head over to wetflyswing.com/members. That's MEMBERS to see our partner companies and some of the innovative products they have going on over there. Okay, back to the show.
The Hells Bay boats was a design that was needed for really, really serious technical shallow water fishing. There was absolutely nothing that existed to fill that gap. And we were doing it at the time with aluminum John boats, which were very hard riding. They were not dry when you got into weather. And worst of all, they were extremely noisy when you were trying to sneak up on fish in shallow water. So we had a John boat that was our favorite in terms of its dimensions. And so we decided to build a skiff that would be as light as a John boat with similar dimensions, but which had hull characteristics that would cause the boat to be dry when you were running in seas, and would cause it to be very, very quiet, totally silent when you were poling it. And to achieve the extreme shallow draft, the boat had to be either small and light or extremely long and wide to displace enough water to float shallow. We didn't want that because it was harder to pole. So we went with the small, extremely light concept, which was totally foreign to anything that existed at the time. And so it wasn't immediately well received, but as a few of them trickled out there and people began to recognize what they could accomplish with these skiffs, all at once there was a groundswell. And with that recognition came more orders for boats than we could say grace over. And it gave, of course, to a successful business.
Yeah, and those. And what year was that when you first sold your first boat?
It was in the last of the 90s, I would say. Okay. Probably not maybe 96 to 98, somewhere in there.
Okay, so you had the Walker Cay Chronicles going for quite a number of years before you even got your first boat out on the market. Were you using what boats were you using first? So you're using aluminum boats with part of that show?
We were using aluminum boats, and there were a couple of fiberglass hulls that had originally been designed for other things other than fishing, but they were, if we could just get the hulls and then build them up ourselves, they were suitable to the kind of fishing that we were doing. And then once we started doing that, another manufacturer came along, a fellow who built ski boats. His name was Bob Hughes, really, really nice guy. And he became interested in building a technical poling skiff. And he did, with input from some of the prominent light tackle anglers in South Florida, and built a wonderful skiff. And it was, in fact, the first production skiff that was really of high quality and good design. And it was very, very successful. He sold a lot of them, and they were really, really good, tough boats. They were heavy, and they didn't go really, really shallow, but they were great boats. And they were sort of the cutting edge for many years before we came along with the little skiff that we called a whip ray.
And are there other companies out there doing a similar product as your boats now?
Yeah, it's like anything else. If you invent something that's really, really good and well accepted, there'll be people who shamelessly knock it out.
Yeah.
And they have. I mean, shamelessly. I mean, copy every facet of the boat. I mean, make claims that are utterly ridiculous possible, but I guess that's part of the I mean, it's like fly reels and fly lines and lures and everything. I mean, go to Korea and go to China and knock it off. I mean, not knock it off, copy it.
Copy it, yeah.
And then bring it back into the States and sell it as your own. And it's horrible. I've seen it. The most shamelessly I've seen it is with coolers.
Oh yeah.
The people who have knocked off Yeti.
Yep. There's a bunch of them.
I mean, I don't know how they hold their heads up.
Yeah.
Well, I guess they hold their heads up because they're making money.
Yeah. Do you think it's changed if you look at today versus, say, in the 60s with, products coming out? Or do you think we saw the same thing back then?
Oh, no. I mean, things were made in America then. And there were business codes.
Oh, sure.
Of codes of conduct, and people were prouder than to just copy things. Instead, they invented better things. And America has always done that until, this era, when we don't do that anymore. We just copy stuff that somebody else worked really, really hard to invent, and not only invent, but manufacture and bring to market,
right?
And create the market.
Huh.
And then people come along and copy it. I mean, to the centimeter copy it.
No kidding.
And no, there should be laws that prevent that.
Yeah.
But at least laws that prevent the importation of copies of American products, because we can't compete labor-wise here.
No.
So anyway, that's
we were talking. It's an interesting conversation. I was just, we had an episode with the Drake. They have a podcast with the Drake cast, and the producer of that show was mentioning how he was interviewing some of the folks from Sims, and he was kind of calling them out a little bit because they talked about how they have a set of their waders that are made in the USA. But for the most part, most of Sim's waders are made outside. They're outside of this country. And it was kind of one of those things where he was calling about a little bit like, well, you're not really and not everything's made in the USA. So it just seems so hard. Even the biggest, maybe even the best companies, right, are still going overseas. So it's just it's like a tough place we're in. I think everybody feels like they have to go over there, right?
Well, I have no problem with people doing that. I think it makes sense to do that in some cases, and building things offshore have some advantages to Americans.
Yeah.
So I have no trouble with that concept. What I have trouble with is people going offshore and cheaply copying things. Yeah, that's what I have a problem with.
That's right.
Offshore is, the fact that we manufacture things offshore is something we brought on ourselves. Yeah. Through our own labor practices. We chased the business offshore. So we have no one to thank for that but ourselves, and that's evolution, I guess.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, well, let's take it back to, thinking a little bit more on fly fishing. What do you think, you fish for pretty much, it seems like about every species. Is there, this is probably a hard one for you, but if you had to pick one, you could only fly fish for one saltwater species out there, what would you say? Why
did I know you were going to ask me
Did
this
you know
question?
That? Do you know Jim Teeney?
Sure.
Yeah, Jim Teeney. Yeah, he's a guy out in our area, and I asked him the same question, so I haven't asked that to many people, but I'm curious. Do you have a good answer for it? Is that?
No, I know. I've known Jim Teeney for centuries. He's a cool guy. I love to fish for bonefish, and I loved to fish in Florida for bonefish. It was the finest bonefish destination in the world. They're virtually gone from Florida now, but the Bahamas is pretty close geographically and easy to get there. And they have a good number of bonefish and a good number of places to fish for them. And so I really, really, really enjoy fishing for bonefish.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what? Go ahead.
I think the requirements for fishing for bonefish are challenging, and cause us to be better, and cause us to fish better and cast better and drive our lures better, and I think it's a great challenging little fish.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking, you mentioned without getting deep into the all the problems and the environmental conservation, all that stuff. Can you give us a kind of a couple minute summary of what happened to all the bonefish populations in the Florida area?
I just think it could all be summed up by saying that we did a very, very poor job of taking care of the fish's house. The lack of water quality and all that we've allowed to happen that caused it to be as poor as it is have just impacted the ecosystem to the point where I think the bonefish just decided, you know what, we can paddle out of here. We don't have to live here. And they did.
Yeah. And
you can't imagine in your wildest dreams what this was like when I was a young man. How sterling the bone fishery was in South Florida and the Keys. And it's to the point now where if you're able to catch one in a day, it's a good day.
No kidding.
If you're able to see one or two in a day, it's a good day. So it's really, really sad. And that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of how poor the water quality around the whole state is. But believe me, it's a subject that once you get me started on,
okay,
that'll be the end of the podcast.
All right. Well, let's hold it off there. That's a good. Well, yeah, I'll have to follow up with you, provide some links to some of the stuff that's going on out there, because I do have some other questions I wanted to touch on. And, one of them was just thinking about how you got to where you are bringing it back. I mean, can you talked a lot of the history back to the early 60s, you getting into the fishing, but can you give us a brief history of like the saltwater fly fishing? When did it start in that area, or just generally? And I mean, you're pretty close to, or were people fishing for many years before that?
No, I think you could probably time it to the end of the Second World War.
Okay.
People, men returning from the war, and it was a time when men, for the first time in the history of the country, were able to get mortgages, home mortgages, and automobile loans, and jobs, and people had disposable income and some leisure time, principally weekends, but they had that. And there was a small cadre of outdoor writers after the war, like Joe Brooks,
yeah.
Who began to popularize fly fishing in both fresh and saltwater. Joe was a huge force during that time in terms of exposing fly fishing to this mass of people who were coming back and looking for things to do in the outdoors, because the outdoors then was what we had. We didn't have the internet, we didn't have Twitter, and we didn't have Facebook, and that's what we had. People hunted and fished. The organized sports weren't even that big then. Professional organized sports. So hunting and fishing and fly fishing, Joe had this unique ability to make it seem like the greatest adventure in the world. Certainly he made me feel that way. And so all this was happening around the country, but the saltwater part of it was pretty much directed at the east coast of the United States, and more than any place else, South Florida, because of the number of species that were available. In the Northeast, they did fly fish for saltwater fish, but the number of species that they fished for in the salt was, 4, 5, or 6 fish.
Gotcha.
There were 50 in Florida that were readily available. You could wade and catch all kinds of fish, or drive along canals, saltwater canals, and it was really, really, really an amazing place.
When did you start seeing? I mean, it was amazing. I mean, was it just a slow transition to not being amazing as far as fish populations?
It was insidious. It wasn't as though a switch was thrown. The process, and I think because Florida sits on an aquifer, which is like a giant sponge, I think, maybe the first 50 years of things that we did wrong were absorbed by nature.
Yeah.
Or nature was able to, her immune system wasn't overwhelmed, but I think it's been cumulative. And like any immune system, there comes a point where it becomes more difficult to fight the invasion of pollutants and chemicals and herbicides and pesticides and agro runoff and all of the problems that have been introduced to the natural world in South Florida.
Yep.
So it wasn't something that you saw coming down the tracks and prepared for. It just crept up on all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly we realized that we had done a terrible job. And we're struggling now to find a way, if indeed there is a way. I don't know that there is. I'm hopeful, and I'm definitely in the fight.
Mm-hmm.
But some days I look at the politics, and I look at the money, and I look at the overwhelming tourism and influx of people into Florida, and wonder if indeed anything can be saved. I'm hopeful.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe we can take it back real quick to, again, thinking back, you got into some of these big shows, and I mean, you were doing a lot of stuff, and I'm thinking about when you first mentioned getting started. Was there a time when you kind of had some sort of a big break in your life, or some transitional point that really elevated you to that next stage where you were kind of doing the TV and stuff, or did that kind of slowly evolve?
No, I think there was, and I think it was the day that I realized that I wasn't able to guide and do television at the same time, or do both, continue to do both. I couldn't book, and bookings as a guide were very often a year out. And so you'd book, and you were trying to book prime fishing time. That's what people wanted, to buy time, and prime tides, prime moon phases. And you'd get there, and you didn't have those times to film, or you needed to go to Nicaragua and film small tarpon or something there, but you couldn't because you had days booked a year in advance. And so when I decided to give up guiding and devote myself full time to television and consulting, and then I did some writing as well. And so anyway, the day that I made the decision that I really couldn't be a guide any longer, I think that was the pivotal day.
That and then the consulting. So you went in, and what type of consulting were you doing back then?
I think some of the first consulting that I did was for rod manufacturers, and then reel manufacturers, and clothing manufacturers, and footwear, and it just expanded to the outdoor industry, kind of across the outdoor industry, and I continue to do those things today.
Yeah, that's right. Because you're not only, we're not going to have time to get into all the stuff you do, but not only do you get into fly fishing, but you're a big, I think, turkey hunter and just normal, just gear fishing. You kind of do it all. Do you think, I mean, when you think of, I guess, turkey hunting, is that something, you've got as much passion as fishing?
Much more. My passion is hunting, and mostly traditional archery, and but I hunt upland birds, I hunt turkeys, I hunt ducks, deer, hogs, turkeys. I hunt every single day that I can, and the fishing is something that I love, but it's my vocation. My avocation is somewhere in the woods, always.
There you go. And has that always been the way for you?
Always.
Yep. Okay. What we mentioned, you talked about some of the biggest names in fly fishing, Lefty Kreh, Joe Brooks, just fishing in the world. Is there any other mentors you've had over the years that have influenced, helped you to get to where you are?
Yeah, I think in fishing, Lefty, the word mentor gets kicked around today so often, and so inappropriately used, because somebody taught you something or showed you something, or you had a nice lunch with them. That doesn't make them your mentor.
No.
Mentoring takes tremendous time and in a long investment of many things on the part of the mentor. And so I'm fortunate in my life that I've had in fishing probably two mentors, true mentors, and in hunting another one. So in my life, three people that I could call mentors, and my life is 76 years long. So it wasn't 5 minutes that these people became my mentor. So Lefty, of course, Lefty I met in 63 or 64, and he lived just right down the street from me, and so I was constantly at his house and driving him nuts from the time I was a teenager till his death earlier this year. And he was a role model and a spirit guide and a friend and a brother, and we fished all over the world together, all over this country together. We talked on the phone 2 or 3 times a week. And then later in his life, when he learned texting, he went nuts with texting, and we texted all the time. And I still text him 2 or 3 times a week. I'm not ready to quit that yet.
Yeah.
So Lefty was huge in my life, and he was the guy that I called when I was happy, and he's the guy I called when I had problems or when I had ethical decisions to make. Lefty was always there. And another person who was very, very influential and helpful in my life was Stu Apte. And very unselfish in his help and guidance, and so Lefty and Stu, tremendous factors in my life. And I'm not talking about just helping me get from here to there or that
Right.
sort of thing. I mean, they were truly role models and idols, and I never idolized professional athletes or politicians or movie actors or anything like that. It was always people who were in the natural world, and those were the two people who surfaced and whose paths became my own.
Gotcha. And you also you mentioned Joe Brooks. I think watching the shows and stuff. Did you guys cross paths back in the? I can't remember even what era he was really doing his stuff. But did you have a connection there at all?
Yeah, I knew Joe, and I loved to read his. He was a tremendous author, and he did some of the early outdoor television. And Joe was Lefty's mentor.
Oh.
Joe started Lefty in fly fishing, and Joe truly was a mentor and an idol of Lefty's.
Huh.
And so Joe was removed from me by a generation, but we still, Joe was the director of a tournament in South Florida that I was very active in, and our paths crossed many times because of Lefty.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but Joe was much more important to Lefty's life than he ever was to mine.
Sure.
And that was just a generational thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
But Stu was more. Stu and Lefty were more contemporaries, and a little older, but still contemporaries. And I was just, the timing of my life has been so perfect. I mean, people like Dave Whitlock, have become tremendous friends through my life, and Jim Teeney, who you mentioned earlier. Jim and I we've elk hunted together, and we've fished together, and we've done business together. And I can say that about many of the people who are prominent in the fly fishing world today. Are you familiar with Chico Fernandez at all?
Yeah, I know the name. I haven't. Yeah, I'm not totally familiar though.
Chico and I met him in 1959, right when he came from Cuba, and he and I grew up together. Went to high school and college, and I mean, we've been friends for 60 years, and so just good timing. I just been lucky.
No, it sounds like you've been around obviously the most influential people in the world. There's no question about that. But as you sit there now, I mean, it sounds like you still have some good stuff coming up. You're talking about a new movie and things like that. Do you have? When I guess you look back on your life, and your times, I guess there's a couple ways to ask this question. One would be, when we're all gone in 50 years or so, is there something you would really want to be remembered for if you think about, what you've done out there in the fishing world?
Well, I don't know. I've never been a seeker of world records or that sort of thing. No, there's nothing I can think of. Lefty helped me so much, and in all the years, never asked me for a thing. I mean, never asked for anything. He always hoped that I would do the same thing that he did. Give other folks a hand and help pass along whatever knowledge we've been able to bring to the sport, and the sum total of a lot of experience. That's just, and the just by the grace of timing, the things that I've experienced, nobody else will ever be able to experience, because those things don't exist
Right.
anymore.
Right.
No one will be able to pioneer the things that I've been fortunate to pioneer because it's been done.
Mm-hmm.
There may be other things, but those things, we were there for that, and we did that, and we made those contributions, and so I think those ultimately will be the things. If I'm remembered at all, it'll probably be for a compilation of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just thinking Lefty, like we've talked here. I mean, I think one thing, he's definitely remembered for already. I know I'd never met him, but just heard stories and stuff. But, just how, just the story you told and how he was always there for not only his friends, but for everybody. That was the amazing thing. Like just people he never knew or anything. And so that's, something that amazing.
It is amazing. It's totally amazing. I've heard literally hundreds of people who referred to him as their mentor, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But they have that feeling legitimately. They feel that.
Yeah.
And he was able to reach people in that way, which is remarkable.
Mm-hmm. That is. Well, Flip, we're about there. Do you have a couple minutes for a quick little rapid fire round?
Sure.
Okay. I always like to ask, just kind of getting, and we're talking a little bit about bonefish here. When you think of fly fishing, do you have a couple of your go-to flies, or a couple of patterns you like to use when you're out there fishing for them?
Sure. I think the bonefish patterns like steelhead patterns and attractor patterns in western streams go through eras of popularity, and then they fade away, and sometimes they come back, but they come and they go. And today I think the bonefish pattern that is most popular as I see it, and I travel around the bonefish world a bunch, it's a fly called the spawning shrimp.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a number of different renditions of the spawning shrimp, but the basic pattern remains pretty much the same and incredibly effective on bonefish these days.
Okay. And do you have when you think of bone fishing, or maybe just fly fishing in general, do you have a tip or two that you think would help somebody that's maybe going to be heading out on their first trip out there for bonefish sometime?
Yes. Instead of investing a lot of money in a rod and a reel, invest that money in lessons, so that you know how to use both, and spend less money on the rod and more money on instruction, so that when you get to the point where you're a cast away from whatever fish it is you're fishing for, you're able to make that cast, and not stand there with the prettiest $900 rod in the world, and you can't make the cast.
That's a good one. Yeah, for sure. What about somebody new? I talk to occasionally. We have people on here that are more, newer than you've been doing a long time, but new guys and things like that. Do you have a tip for somebody that's kind of new to fly fishing, kind of the industry or whatever, and they want to get more into it? Maybe become a guide, or over your years of being successful, what would you tell somebody new to it?
Well, I get a lot of, through social media, very, very often get notes from people who want to become guides. And it's hard for me to give that kind of advice today. I'm pessimistic about it. I think, there are places and pockets where being a guide can be wonderful, but a livelihood as a guide these days,
it's tough.
It's a tough path. Not that it can't be done, but it's a tough path, and it's a very physical path, more physical than it ever was. And so there's a time limit on that kind of physical job. And at the same time, there's no 401k, there's no paid vacation, there's no medical coverage. And so these are all things that you have to factor into the romance of being a guide, which is powerful. But all these other things are realistic. And so you have to factor them into decisions about becoming a guide these days. When I did it, it was much easier, and so it's a different world there. And people coming into the sport, I think when I came into fly fishing, it was, I guess I saw it as a way to challenge myself to fish better and to fish harder. Today, it's a little different. People coming into the sport, well, they're not really coming into a sport. They're coming into a lifestyle.
Right. Yep.
There's proper clothing. There's proper footwear.
Yeah.
There's proper skiffs. There's proper drift boats. There's proper rods and reels and lines. And God forbid you don't use the right line. Right. It's a lifestyle now, and you have to have a Yeti cup when you're sitting in the front of the boat, and I mean, it's just totally different deal today. The good part of it is that the learning curve that I had to go through to become the fly fisher that I am, to whatever degree that is, was a long learning curve because there were no cassettes or discs or DVDs or fly fishing schools or seminars or blogs or any of that. It didn't exist. If you wanted to learn how to throw a tight loop, you better get out in the front yard and teach yourself how to do it. And you better have the epiphany quickly, or you were going to waste lots and lots and lots of days in frustration on the water. So none of that is necessary today. You can learn anything you want to learn off your iPhone.
Right. I think
so.
Yeah, that is true. The YouTube generation is kind of crazy. I think you still do have to, people that don't realize it, they, still need to get out and do a lot of practicing and get on the water even after watching those videos. But I hear you. I know you feel like, we've talked about that before, the fact that people watch all these YouTube videos and they're like, oh my gosh, what line should I get, this and that? And they're totally freaking out. And the first thing they should do is just stop watching videos and get on the water and start fishing and start casting like you're saying. And that's a great point. So I was going to note too, Flip, we're about out of here, but all the show notes and links and things like that will be at wetflyswing.com/flip. I'll have a link to some information, including a show I did with Davey Watton in episode 35. He talked a little bit about this when he was talking about Dave Whitlock and how, because Davey's been guiding for, I think he still guides like 200 days a year, and he's I think he's not too far away from your age. But he asked Dave Whitlock, he was like, so what's going on with this? We're these, we've done all this stuff and we're still working out here. What happened? So kind of jokingly, I think Dave basically said, hey, are you enjoying what you're doing? And he made that point like, well, you are doing something that's pretty amazing. So, but I hear you, what you're saying too.
Yeah. Davey Watton is a monster. He's one of the people that I really, really look up to. And I consider Davey one of the most talented, sweetwater fishermen that I've ever known in my life. Mm-hmm. And a wonderful guy to boot.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right, Flip, well, I'll let you get out here. Do you have, in the next 6 to 12 months, anything we can expect? Are we looking for this new movie coming out?
Yeah, it'll be here. I'd say that it should probably be completed in 30 days or 30 or 60 days or so, no later than that. And I've got a rum project that I'm involved with some friends in, and so we're hoping to be out with that right around the first of the year, and keep looking for Frigate Reserve rum.
Oh, rum. Okay, so this is actual drinking. This is rum.
This is absolutely an adult beverage.
All right, good. Frigate. All right, yeah, I'll get a link out to that as well. Okay, so. That's awesome. Frigate
Reserve.
Okay, Frigate Reserve, good stuff. And if they want to find you, they can just go to Instagram, Flip Pallot, or at flippallot.com.
Absolutely, and I'm a very good pen pal.
All right, good stuff, Flip. Well, yeah, you were easy to get a hold of when I contacted you, so I appreciate that. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you for coming on. I think I was talking a little bit about maybe going to do some fishing and species stuff, but I mean, your background in the history was well worth the discussion we had today. So maybe, down the line in, a year or two, I can get you back on. We can talk a little more about some of the fishing stuff, but I appreciate you coming on and sharing all your knowledge and the history there.
My great pleasure. Bye for now.
All right. See ya. So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes with all the links we covered, just go to wetflyswing.com/70. And if you get a chance, please leave a review on iTunes. Be great to be able to read another review out here. Thanks again for stopping by to check out the show today. I'm looking forward to catching up with you soon and hope to maybe see you online or on the river.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.